did it not occur to any of these journalists to ask, why are you really here? What was it that brought you out here? And of course, they don't want to run that because it counters their narrative. It goes against the narrative they're trying to spin. But that's why we made our film. We made our film to show people, to give the students an actual place to say, what was it that, what were you actually reacting to? I mean, what was it that evoked such, a visceral response? Why did you feel the need to do something so drastic? What could have possibly made you feel the need to act drastically? What could possibly be happening in the world right now that requires drastic action? And it's like, it should be obvious. It should be so obvious. I mean, it's the same thing the students have been protesting for like 6 months, 8 months prior to that, the encampment.
Welcome to the Mondowise podcast. My name is Khader Jabbar, digital director at Mondowise. On today's episode, Yumna Patel speaks with Kei Pritsker, journalist at Breakthrough News and co-director of the Encampments, a powerful new documentary chronicling the peaceful student-led movement for Palestine in response to Israel's genocide in Gaza. Co-directed with Michael Workman and produced by Breakthrough News and Watermelon Pictures, the film offers an embedded look at the nonviolent protests that began at Columbia University and spread to more than 100 campuses across the U.S. In April of last year, Columbia students set up an encampment demanding the university divest from companies complicit in Israel's assault on Gaza. Within days, riot police stormed the campus, arresting over 100 students, sparking a nationwide wave of encampments and escalating repression under then-President Biden. The backlash was swift. Universities cracked down, police raided campuses, and media figures smeared students as radicals to deflect attention from the atrocities they were protesting against. The film follows organizers like Mahmoud Khalil, whose arrest by ICE under President Trump's catch and revoke crackdown prompted the filmmakers to accelerate its release. Through months of on-the-ground footage, The Encampments captures not only the political urgency of what many are calling the student intifada, but a broader generational call to resist empire, genocide, and complicity. Students connected Palestine to climate justice, indigenous sovereignty, and global anti-colonial movements, declaring simply, Palestine is everywhere. Thanks for listening.
Kei Pritsker is one of the co-directors of the new documentary, The Encampments, and is also a reporter at Breakthrough News. Kei, thanks so much for joining me today.
How's it going?
Good. We're happy to have you on. I'm really excited to talk to you about this film. I had the opportunity to see it at the pre-screening in New York a few weeks ago, and I haven't gotten it out of my head since. So I'm really glad that we're getting the chance to talk to you about it. Before we get into it, could you just give our audience an overview of the film? What does it cover, and why should people watch it?
Yeah, so the film is ostensibly, obviously, about the encampment movement. It's about Columbia. It's about what the students did last April. It is about some of the main organizers there. It sort of tracks their story, how they got involved, what their motivations were, this and the other, what divestment is, what they were seeking, how the encampment movement became, a movement relegated to a few campuses to a worldwide movement. But it talks a lot about it talks about the backgrounds of some of the organizers, obviously notably Mahmoud. Talks about he talks about his own background, his family story, these things that I think really not just paint a picture of who he was, but really just destroy this whole narrative that he's just that he just showed up on campus one day and was like, you know what, I just really hate Jews and I have to do this encampment thing. Right. His whole family history, his whole story is colored by Zionism. I mean, he lives where he, does today. His family, grew up his parents grew up in refugee camps. He grew up in a refugee camp because of Zionism, because of the state of Israel. So, this is an issue that has basically defined his entire life. So about that too, it addresses all of the lies and misconceptions about the encampment. It addresses what all the politicians were saying. And people should see it because why would you ever hide from this information? If you support the encampments, go see it because you're gonna love the film. But if you disagree or you believe some of these things that have been said about the students, then you should definitely go. You should absolutely
Yeah.
go and challenge your preconceived notions because, I think you're being lied to. I think that is essentially the thesis of the film is that you're being lied to about what these students were after.
Sure.
And if you really truly believe what you believe about this, then you should not be afraid of seeing a film that might challenge your perspective.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point to make. That certainly stood out as one of the kind of primary messages of the film. And it's something one of many things I think the film did really well was, just unpacking all the lies from the politicians to the media, just the whole way, the entire narrative around these encampments that's kind of developed in the US over the past year, just completely unravels once you actually watch this film and you kind of see what it was actually like, and what was actually happening there on those campuses. So I want to talk more later on about kind of the media and the role that they played in this. But before we kind of get into that, just to kind of paint the picture of how this film came to be, I got the chance at the New York screening just to hear a little bit from you about how this film came together. And from what you described, it was almost kind of an accident, or at least, you weren't going into this thinking that you'd make a feature film. Could you tell us a little bit more about kind of how the film came to be? How did you end up in the middle of these encampments?
Yeah, so I'm not a filmmaker. I'm a journalist. Most of my videos are 5 to 7 minutes long. The longest I ever do is like 15. So I went to Colombia. I went to the encampments with the intention of reporting on a protest, and I had been in touch with the Columbia students since November of 2023. That was when I first started going to Columbia and covering their protests. There's a scene in the film that's shot from the first protest I went to in November after the banning of SJP and JVP, which are two pro-Palestinian groups at Columbia. So I already had a connection with the students, and they knew me as a reporter who, covers protests, but supports Palestine specifically. I mean, if anyone that's familiar with my reporting knows that I support Palestine. I don't hide that. That's not a secret. And they invited me. They asked me to come cover the encampment when that was happening, and I showed up. I was expecting to just make a pretty quick news package about it and leave. But that first night I was there, there was a rumor that the NYPD was going to sweep the encampment. So I decided to stay. I decided to stay overnight. I slept there, and the sweep ended up coming the next morning. And that was the catalyzing event that started the entire encampment movement, the global encampment movement, because it was those scenes of students being hauled off in handcuffs off their own campus where they pay tuition to study and learn, being hauled off by their own administration. That was so upsetting and just hypocritical and outrageous that it struck a chord with the rest of the country, and especially students who said, no, we are Columbia. We stand with the Columbia students. They're heroes. They're brave for what they're doing, and we're going to do exactly what they were doing on our campus. So after that happened, I mean, it was like a matter of hours. I just started seeing encampments popping up around the world. So that's when I approached the students and I was like, hey guys, I would like to live here with you. And they were nice enough to let me live on the encampment. And I think there were 2 other camera crews in the encampment that were allowed in the encampment, but most people weren't. And I think that's, because they knew me and they knew that I support Palestine. They knew I wasn't going to try to mangle or twist their words or try to, mess around with what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's something just to kind of point out for people as a viewer, something that I was struck by is just I mean, how real it all felt. This isn't a film where you're kind of collecting media footage or archival footage or whatever it is. Obviously, that's a small feature of it, but you were really there in the middle of all of it. And so that really comes across on screen, the access that you had to the encampments, to the students, and also, the vulnerability that they showed you when, in their interviews and in these just really, really tough moments, and these kind of moments of reckoning that they were having on their campus with the administration, with police and law enforcement. That all definitely came across as a viewer. And watching it, you can't help but wonder kind of what that was like, for you as a journalist, as a filmmaker, to actually be there in the middle of it. So I'm just curious to ask you kind of what was that like for you, even now, maybe in retrospect, thinking about how you were there in the middle of this very historic event.
Well, I miss it. I miss it a lot. It was really, it was really exciting. It was really, I guess to speak on the encampment itself, the students were just so well organized. And I think there's this narrative that the Zionists are trying to push about the encampments, that it's just a bunch of dumb kids. They don't know what they're doing.
Right.
They just saw one TikTok and they, flipped out. So they decided to destroy the campus. That's the narrative they're trying to spin, that it's a very unsophisticated, very, rudimentary, uneducated group of people, but it's the complete opposite. Like, they basically organized like a small town in the middle of their campus.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk to any of those students, they could tell you at length about Columbia's complicity, about its investments, about all this.
Sure.
But I would say, moreover, like it felt so powerful and emotional because everything that was happening at Columbia, like all the other campuses were watching what was happening at Columbia, and they were all doing their own thing. And it was just like the power that it felt like we had in those 2 weeks, that month was, it really felt like the country was coming to its knees. Obviously, it would be crazy to think that it would happen. It would all happen like that in a matter of weeks. But I think it was just a small glimpse of the power that the Palestine movement can wield if it chooses to wield it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember as these encampments were happening and they were cropping up all over the country, just kind of watching it all unfold on social media. And it was just this very breathtaking kind of moment, as you said, like just seeing kind of almost, the entire country be brought to its knees and the government by these students. And watching the film again definitely evoked, those emotions again. Again, just seeing, like how organized these students were, how passionate they were, how well-versed and well-educated, unsurprisingly, right, that they were on this issue, and how much, again, that really combated this, I guess, part of the narrative that they were these just, naive students, just trying to get attention on social media or whatever it was. Earlier this month marked the 1-year anniversary of the Gaza Solidarity Encampment at Columbia and the subsequent encampments at the other universities. And even though it's been a year, clearly, I couldn't think of a more topical issue right now, which is Palestine activism on U.S. college campuses. We've seen students directly targeted for their activism and disappeared by the government and shipped off to these faraway ICE prisons. One of the main characters in the film who you mentioned is Mahmoud Khalil, who was the first of many students to be targeted in this latest wave by the Trump administration. There's this moment in the film where during a press conference in which Mahmoud was speaking to reporters, I think it was outside the gates of Columbia, where a reporter asks, what if you were deported? And they asked this question to Mahmoud. And I remember hearing gasps in the audience, just because it was, on one hand, it's just a pretty shocking and kind of bold question. Like, why is the reporter asking the student this question? But also, because this is exactly what the administration's trying to do to him and to others right now. Do you think, this is very much a loaded question, but do you think that was always the plan, right? To criminalize these students to the point of deportation? given that like a year ago, that those are the ideas that were being floated around at the time, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the answer is yes. I think the reason they weren't able to do it was because the Biden administration wanted to maintain this illusion of democracy, of, the institutions are working, of, these sorts of, that he's a liberal, sure, we're funding a genocide, but, we want there to be a healthy debate about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think he felt very threatened, in Kamala Harris. I think the Democrats felt, could perceive the fact that their base was very, very disturbed, understatement, about their funding and support for the genocide. So I think they were trying to walk a fine line of like, we're going to pay lip service to, we're going to say, oh, we want a ceasefire. Oh, the killing of civilians is getting out of hand. We're going to say this over and over. Israel, someone needs to invest. They need to investigate themselves. They need to investigate the killing of Hind Rajab. They need to investigate the killing of the World Central Kitchen workers. They were trying to position themselves or to make themselves out to be like, oh yeah, we're a check on Israel. So I think to go after, to criminalize pro-Palestine speech would have just completely ripped the mask off of the Biden administration. But obviously they did crush every single encampment in America. Right. That was in Trump, that was Biden. And they did it under the guise of, oh, well, now it's getting underhand. Now it's, they're vandals or this, that, and the other, which is, ridiculous. But I think, I think that was always the plan. I think, the Israel lobby has had a lot more success with Trump. If you look at the people in the Trump cabinet, this is like, it is stuffed to the brim with Israel, people bribed up to the neck with Israeli donations, with pro-Zionist donations. So this administration, I think, is far more willing to do that because it pays homage to, what the base wants, which is this idea of, oh, we're going to deport anyone that's anti-America, even though I would say these students aren't anti-America, but also they're just, they're giving a gift to the people that got them elected, to Miriam Adelson, to all, Steve Witkoff, to all these Zionist donors that helped fundraise for the Trump campaign. So yes, I think this administration is far more willing to do it because of the people that supported them and the way they're able to frame the issue of deportations to their base.
Yeah. And like you said, the way that the ability or the willingness of, or let's say the willingness of the Trump administration to actually come after the students in this way is certainly dictated by, their base, their supporters, but their ability to do it and to do it so brazenly, certainly that was made easier for them by all the steps that the Biden administration took, the media took, Columbia University and others took kind of leading up to this Trump presidency. And again, that's, I think, definitely part of the narrative that the film shows and portrays really well. In one of his letters from the ICE prison in Louisiana, Mahmoud Khalil criticizes the failure of Columbia University and administrators to protect him and protect the other students that were coming under these attacks from Zionist groups. They were being doxxed, they were being intimidated, threatened, etc. And again, another thing that the film does really well is just lay out for the viewer just, how complicit Columbia was, right, in the targeting of its students by the NYPD and its failure, again, to protect them. Could you talk a little bit more about how the reactions of universities like Columbia and also UCLA, which was highlighted in the film as well, their reactions to the pro-Palestine protests on their campuses, how those played a crucial role in paving the way for the government repression we're seeing now? Because it wasn't just the Biden administration, right? It was the way that these universities reacted a year ago and today as well. That's kind of helping the Trump administration do what it's doing.
Yeah. What the the reaction to the encampment showed is that the universities are actually willing to cave under much less pressure. Like
Right.
they were basically afraid of Zionist donors pulling money. So individuals pulling much smaller amounts of money than the federal government is providing these universities. That money alone was enough for them to be like, yeah, let's arrest our own students. That's fundamentally why this happened. I mean, Colombia, there's in no sane world does it make sense to arrest your own students who are doing nothing besides sitting on a lawn peacefully protesting a genocide, unless you are beholden to money, unless there's another party or interest group that you have moral loyalty to. And in the case of Colombia and all the other schools, they felt far more beholden to their donors than the will of their students. That's why they arrested. That's why they crushed the encampments. And that ultimately that was over an amount of money that pales in comparison to what the federal government gives to these universities in the form of grants. So the Trump administration already knew coming in, these people are spineless. They're weak.
Yeah.
As soon as you threaten, their money, as soon as you go after their money, they will do whatever you want them to do. So, we know that Colombia, that the billionaire donors who were threatening Colombia, like Leon Cooperman, like Bill Ackman, like all these Zionist billionaires, were in a group chat with Eric Adams, and they were telling him, you need to crush the camp, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it goes without saying that they were obviously sending all these threats to Colombia as well. So, if you get pushed over, if you get bullied and pushed around by one billionaire, the entire federal government is obviously a much more formidable enemy. And, so I think the Trump administration knew exactly what was going to happen because it happened under Biden.
Right. In the film, as we said, like we talked a little bit about this earlier, you focus a lot on the media. So the way that the mainstream media in particular reported on these protests and the way that these students were demonized, from MSNBC to CNN to Fox News, all across the board, right? And how these pundits basically took the students' message of divestment and liberation and kind of perverted it into this image of these anti-Semitic mobs that were threatening the safety of Jewish students on campus. Why was it so important for you to bring attention to and to really highlight the role of the media in this story?
Because they're the main purveyors of these lies. I mean, they're the biggest liars. They're the biggest accomplices of Zionism, really, because all this whole genocide, like this whole genocidal project, really rests on lies more than anything. More important than any bomb or missile or tank or fighter jet that Israel has, none of all of that pales in comparison to control of the narrative. As soon as Israel loses control of the narrative and people start to see it as a racist, Jewish supremacist ethno state instead of this pluralistic democracy that it's trying to make itself out to be, that's the day that the project ends. Like that is the day when most of the world's people already have dropped their support for Israel, but that'll be the day that the American people drop their support for Israel. And once that happens, the money's going to stop coming. The weapons are going to stop coming. They're going to run out of missiles and bombs. And, that'll be the end of their not just the end of their genocide. It'll be the end of their entire occupation. So the control of the media, is so, or the control of media opinion is so crucial to Israel, which is why, they spend so much money and time on PR, on crafting these groups like Yola Israel. This is why they spend so much money recruiting influencers to go to Israel. This is why they spend money flying members of Congress out to Israel, why they give talking points to members of Congress. It was There was a photo leaked of talking points that AIPAC were giving members of Congress on I think it was the World Central Kitchen bombing.
Yeah.
Point being, Israel has spent billions of dollars crafting this very delicate narrative that they are the victims. They're the victims of anti-Semitism and bigotry and all this, when in reality they're a nuclear armed superpower with a modern air force and navy that's stomping off against a largely defenseless population. So the whole gig sort of rests on this idea. And I think the media, which obviously is we call it the fourth branch of the government. I mean, it's essentially like a mouthpiece of the Pentagon and the U.S. Foreign policy. They obviously have a vested interest in supporting Israel because that's like the number one, that is the most important asset of the United States in West Asia. So, the media has been horrible on Palestine, and they say that the first casualty in war is the truth, and I think if people really knew what people in Israel think. If they really knew what was happening over there, if they really knew the extent of the carnage and the war crimes being committed, if the TV actually reported any of this, I think the support for Israel would drop overnight. So, the media's role is I don't think you can understate the importance of the media's role.
Yeah, and something of the many kind of lies, right, that the media has been perpetuating. About the genocide, about Israel's occupation and apartheid and U.S. complicity. But specifically, one of the lies around the encampments and the student movement was, again, this intense focus and labeling of the protests as anti-Semitic, and particularly these, manufactured concerns around Jewish safety. And there are several moments in the film where it's almost comical, because what you do is you kind of just juxtaposed what the media was saying and what the politicians were saying about Jewish students feeling unsafe, and then just showing images on screen of Jewish students singing and eating at the encampments and praying and organizing and very clearly feeling safe, and also being a part of the encampments. And it wasn't this super kind of deliberate moment in the film where you're like, okay, we're going to unpack this idea around, anti-Semitism and Jewish safety. But it was sort of this thread that just subtly throughout the film saw this narrative unravel. And I think that's kind of one of the many reasons why, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, why it's so important for people who have these preconceived notions about the encampments, or who really do think that these are these wild anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish mobs going around, destroying campuses, why it is really just so important for them to see this film and kind of see the reality of what was actually happening. So I just wanted to note that for the viewers.
Yeah. And, there's not a single video of any Jewish students being attacked. I still haven't seen one. I've challenged many Zionists to show me a video. Show me a video. They say all these things. People were spit on. People were attacked. Then show me some proof. Let's see some proof, because I can show you 50 videos of Zionists spitting on pro-Palestine protesters, saying you should be raped, you should be killed, you should go to Gaza. They hate gay people. They'll throw you off the building. And, obviously, it's almost this is part of the propaganda. This is part of the psychological warfare that they're waging now on college campuses against this country for years. I mean, anyone that's been in the Palestine movement knows this is their go-to argument. Like the whole anti-Semitism accusation is their go-to argument. And it's not even an argument. It's really a distraction. Like they only bring up anti-Semitism when you start talking about Israel's crimes. Like you'll say, oh, well, you know, Israel, they've bombed, they've destroyed all of the universities in Gaza, or they bombed the water desalination plant in Gaza, and all the water is undrinkable. They bombed the energy grid. They bombed the energy grid in Gaza, and they only have 4 hours of electricity in Gaza per day. And then you say these things. You list out Israel's crimes. They're murdering civilians, you know, stealing land, killing you know, doctors, journalists, all these people. That is when they bring up the anti-Semitism. It's always when you're naming Israel's crimes, they say, oh, well, what about this? What about anti-Semitism? And it's a complete distraction issue. I think anyone who has any common sense can see that they're using the accusation of anti-Semitism simply to distract, to move the conversation away from what Israel's actually doing. And you know, I mean, I think so. I mean, it's crucial to show, obviously, like it's crucial to show that it's not anti-Semitic, but I think it was also a way of pointing out that the people who are accusing the movement and us of being hateful, of being bigots, are actually going on TV every day saying, we're going to turn Gaza into a parking lot. We want to, you know, we don't think there are any innocent people in Gaza. Gaza is a cemetery because there are no children in Gaza. So, you know, there's a saying in the movement, every accusation is a confession. They're the racists. Yeah. They are the genocidal, you know, bloodthirsty. They have an insatiable appetite for violence. I mean, they're literally talking about killing every single person in the Gaza Strip, and they have the gall to call us violent. It is the biggest lie.
Yeah. A little while ago, you said something. You said, you know, if you know, the media or, you know, journalists or these networks on TV just showed what was actually happening in Gaza, you know, public support for Israel would erode completely. Something that I was struck by in the film was how you take viewers from college campuses in the US actually to Gaza. And, you know, the film takes us inside Gaza, inside the refugee camps, inside the bombed out cities. And to be honest, I was, as a viewer, it's not something I was expecting. Like, I was a little bit surprised that we actually went into Gaza, right? It's not, I don't think it's the obvious choice, given that this is a story primarily about the encampment. So you kind of expect the story to stay here, right? Stay in the US, stay on campuses. But when you see that juxtaposition, the back and forth between the encampments and then Gaza under bombardment, it really grounds you as a viewer, I think, in a reminder of what these students were fighting for and what it all came back to, which the students were constantly talking about. Like, this is not about us. This is about Gaza. This is about Palestine. And so that sort of like choice that you made as filmmakers to do that definitely resonated as a viewer. And I'm not sure if that's like the message that you were going for, but that's certainly one that I walked away with. And I just wanted to ask you, kind of from like a filmmaking perspective, like, could you talk a little bit more about that decision specifically, like to showcase Gaza, to go into Gaza, to interview journalists like Bisan Auda for the film, and to take us out of the encampments?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thinking behind that, I mean, the whole point of the film is to say, look, like, you're being given every single reason, every single excuse, every single harebrained theory about why these students were protesting, that they're just bigots, that they're stupid, that they just want to be edgy, that they just want to be cool. Yeah. And what the students were saying throughout the entire process was, this is about Gaza. This is about nothing else. This is not about anything but Palestine, about what is about the genocide. And like, that's really what we want to remind people, because it's what the media would never tell their viewers. Like the vast majority, 90% of the interviews of the students were just obsessing over this anti-Semitism, which didn't exist. And it's like, did it not occur to any of these journalists to ask, why are you really here? What was it? What was it that brought you out here? And of course, they don't want to run that because it counters their narrative. It goes against the narrative they're trying to spin. But that's why we made our film. We made our film to show people, to give the students an actual place to say, what was it that, what were you actually reacting to? I mean, what was it that evoked such, a visceral response? Why did you feel the need to do something so drastic? What could have possibly made you feel the need to act drastically? What could possibly be happening in the world right now that requires drastic action? And it's like, it should be obvious. It should be so obvious. I mean, it's the same thing the students have been protesting for like 6 months, 8 months prior to that, right, the encampment. Like, so, obviously, again, this is a distraction. This is the whole issue of anti-Semitism at these encampments was a total distraction from the fact that these students are trying to bring awareness to the genocide. So there was never going to be a film without that didn't, where Gaza wasn't a central place, a central location, a central setting. I mean, it would have been dishonest, quite frankly. It would have been completely dishonest to what the students were doing, to what was motivating the students, to the thesis of the film, to show the world what the students were really fighting for. It would have been completely dishonest to make a film that just lived in the camp, because it's not camp. This is not summer camp. This is not protest camp. Right. This is a international solidarity movement for Gaza and for humanity.
Yeah, I want to wrap up with just like a final kind of question or reflection from you. Is there a moment in the film, or maybe a moment that's not in the film, from your experience in the encampments or with these students, that has stuck with you more than others, that you'd want to share with people, that might kind of, give an insight into what you hope like the takeaway might be for folks for after they watch the film?
Honestly, man, that's a tough question. I mean, I guess I would just say, like, one of the things that wasn't really shown in the film, we just didn't have time for, was the fact that, like, everyone showed up. And when I mean everyone, I mean like people from all different movements who had all different, issues that they wanted to speak on. Like, it wasn't just a Gaza solidarity encampment. Like, it was a solidarity encampment with all the oppressed people of the world who all see themselves in Gaza. And so there were like classes that happened every single day, and lectures, and people would come and talk about all these different issues. They'd talk about what's happening in the Congo with like cobalt mining. They'd be talking about Korea and the history of U.S. occupation and Japanese occupation there, which mirrors what's happening in Palestine directly. They would talk about all these different issues. And, I think what I would really say is, like, it just reminds you that this is not just a film about Gaza either. Like, this is not just a film about Palestine. It's a film about the society we live in. It's a film about the system we live in, the capitalist system, the imperialist system, in the sense that what is even like the fundamental question here? Like, in the beginning of the film, we ask, what was it about a bunch of students camping out on lawns that made all the most powerful institutions in the country freak out and turn every campus in America into a police state? And it's the fact that billions of dollars of propaganda and these lies that they've spent decades and decades and decades just building in our heads have just shattered in front of their eyes, and they're losing control. And this has implications beyond Palestine. Like, it's one thing for people to see through the lies about Palestine, but like, how far, like, what is the difference between that and realizing like, oh, the war in Iraq was also based on lies. The war in Yemen was based on lies. This war they're trying to sell us against Iran is based on lies. Like, really what they're losing power over, or the ability to do, is like just push the next generation into these endless wars, these wars based on lies, these wars that pit Americans against Muslims and Arabs, which we have nothing against each other. They're trying to pit us against people who aren't actually our enemy. It's the people who are telling us that Muslims are our enemy that are a real enemy. And, I think people are waking up to the fact that we kind of live in this divide and conquer system where we're just, all the people, the proletarians of the world, are just being pit against each other. Well, it's these billionaires, laughing their way all the way to the bank. But I think people are starting to realize who these billionaires are, who these people are who are shutting down protests, who are shutting down free speech. It's the same people who are lobbying our government to send weapons to Israel. So, I think people are starting to connect the dots that this is actually a much bigger movement about who fundamentally controls society, about the fact that in this system, there's actually no democracy. The people have no power. And I think Palestine was emblematic of that, in the fact that you can't even stop a genocide in the so-called greatest democracy in the world. So I think this is, yes, this is a movement for Palestine, but I think the reason it resonated among so many different people who weren't Palestinian, who weren't Arab, who weren't Muslim, is because everyone is starting to realize what the Palestinian issue is showing, which is that the people who run our government, they don't have our interests in mind, and they're trying to pit us against people who are never our enemy to begin with. And we're starting to realize we have way more in common with the Palestinians than we do our own ruling class. So it's an exciting time.
Well, Kei Pritsker, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for making this film. I highly recommend that everyone go watch The Encampments, find a screening at a theater near you if you haven't seen it already, and definitely spread the word about the film. Thank you so much. And good luck with the film.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
That's our show. Mondoweiss is a nonprofit publication with no paywalls. If you would like to support our work, please go to mondoweiss.net/donate. Please leave a rating and review to help other listeners find the show. Subscribe to one of our free email newsletters so you can stay up to date on events in Palestine and related politics here in the U.S. and around the world. Finally, if you have any more feedback, send me an email at dave@mondoweiss.net. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with a new episode.